Good morning, students. Today we are going to start the chapter Employment. First, let us take an example. This example say we'll be able to understand that who are actually employed. One shopkeeper, Raju, a construction worker, Bala, a doctor, Amit, a student, Aman, an unemployed, Sukhvinder, and a housewife, Rajni. Out of these, can you identify who all are employed? From these individuals, there are only three workers. One is Raju, the other is Bala, and the third is Dr. Amit. If we come back to the original example, we had six people. Out of these, the first three are workers, whereas a student Aman, an unemployed Sukhvinder, and a housewife Rajni, they are not workers. Now, when we say this, we need to understand who is a worker. All those persons who are engaged in various economic activities and hence contribute to gross national product are workers. That means all those people who are doing some work due to which they are earning money, they are known as workers. So that is why we have taken the example that the doctor is a worker, a construction worker is a worker, and a shopkeeper is also a worker. Here we need to understand that even if some of them temporarily abstain from work due to illness, injury, or other physical disability, bad weather, festival, social or religious functions, they are also workers, which means that in order to be a worker, he needs to earn his living by working, but it does not mean that he cannot be temporarily absent from work when he is ill or injured or due to any such reason which is mentioned here. When we understand what is worker, now let us understand what is labor force. All persons in a country who are working or seeking work are included in labor force. Now, what is the difference between labor force and workforce? Labor force means all the persons working plus all the persons seeking work. That means if 100 people are working and 50 are seeking work, then 150 is the labor force. Whereas workforce means only working people. That means in this example, 100 people who are working will be workforce and 150 people will be labor force. In our example, we mentioned about Aman, who is a student, and Rajni, who is a housewife. Now, let us understand why they are not a part of workforce or labor force. Because they are not engaged in any economic activity. A housewife does several works, but she doesn't get paid for it. The same is the case with a student. So, because they are not engaged in any economic activity, that is why they are not workers. To understand it deeply, let us take the example of Rajni. Rajni is taking care of her family and kids. Then why is she not a part of workforce? Due to measurement problem, the work done by housewife is not considered as part of economic activity. So, the work that Rajni does, that is taking care of her children, is not included in economic activity because she is not getting paid for it. That is why she is not considered a worker. So, it results in underestimation of GDP. When we discussed in macro GDP and welfare, we mentioned that there are certain activities which might not be economic activities but they lead to the welfare of the people. So, this is one of those activities. And there also we had mentioned that such activities, even though they add to the welfare, they are not included in GDP and this results in underestimation of GDP. Now, let us discuss the type of workers. There are basically two types of workers. One is self-employed and the other is hired worker. Now, the first one, self-employed, are the workers who own and operate the enterprise to earn their livelihood. So they become self-employed. For example, a shopkeeper is a self-employed. Out of the hired workers, there can be regular salaried employees and casual wage labor. When people are hired workers, they get paid in return of the services that they render. Regular salaried employees among the hired workers are the workers engaged by someone or an enterprise and paid his or her wages on regular basis. Like your teachers get paid in terms of salaries every month, so your teachers become regular salaried employees. So all those people who get paid in exchange of their work on a regular basis, they are known as regular salaried employees. Next we come to casual wage labor. Casual wage labor is engaged in others' enterprises and in return they get a remuneration for their work done. Casual wage labor means when laborers are engaged in some job on a temporary basis and only for that duration they get payment. For example, construction workers. Construction workers are casual laborers in the sense that whenever they are engaged in the work of construction, they will get paid for it, and once the construction is over, they will not be paid. Now we are going to discuss what changes have taken place in the structure of employment in the recent times. Number 1, casualization of workforce. Number 2, informalization of workforce. And number 3, jobless growth. Now we are going to discuss them one by one. Casualization of workforce. When we come to know who are self-employed workers and who are casual workers, we should understand now that what is casualization of workforce. The process of moving from self-employment and regular salaried employees to casual wage workers is known as casualization of workforce. Movement from self-employment and regular salaried employment to casual wage work is known as casualization of workforce. There is increase in the percentage of casual workers from 23% in 1972-73 to 33% in 2013 and 14. Casualization indicates that people who were employed in secure jobs, either they were doing their own work, that is they were self-employed, or they were having regular salaried employment in which they were entitled to social security benefits. Due to some reason, they have now become casual wage workers and now they are not having a security of payment on daily basis, and social security benefits are also denied to them. What can be the reasons for casualization of workforce? Number 1, farmers are becoming casual wage workers due to lack of agricultural activity round the year. In those periods in agriculture where they are not having any source of income, the farmers may start working as casual labor. Slow growth of employment in the formal sector. Formal sector means that sector which employs 10 workers or more and gives them social security benefits such as PF, pension, gratuity, etc. Because there is not much job creation in the formal sector, the workers have to move towards the informal sector. In the informal sector or unorganized sector of the economy, there is generally casual labor due to privatization and disinvestment of public sector enterprises. Many people who were in regular salaried jobs lost their jobs due to privatization and disinvestment of private sector enterprises. When public sector decided to sell off a share of their enterprises to the private sector, it is known as disinvestment. When this was done, people who had jobs in the public sector that were disinvested lost their regular salaried jobs and had to become casual labor till the time they could secure any jobs of permanent nature. What was the effect of casualization of workforce? There was lack of stability in employment and there was lack of social security benefits, as I have already mentioned. Some facts about casualization of workforce. Let us see. Self-employment is a major source of livelihood for both men and women, as this category accounts for more than 50% of the workforce for both genders. Self-employment is mostly seen in agricultural sector, in which both men and women are involved. Casual wage is the major source for both men and women, a little more so for females, that is about 31% as compared to men, which is 29%. So generally more female workers are working as casual labor as compared to males. Men are found to be engaged in greater proportions in regular salaried employment, the percentage being 20%, whereas women form only 13% of the regular salaried employees. We can understand one thing, that women are engaged more in such jobs which are of casual nature and which are not regular salaried jobs. Women are exposed to more exploitation as compared to men in case of employment in our country. Now let us understand about informalization of workforce. Informalization means a situation when percentage of workforce in the formal sector declines and that in the informal sector tends to rise. In common language we can say that people move from formal to informal sector, and this process is known as informalization of workforce. To understand this better, let us know what is formal sector and informal sector. All those public sector units and private sector units that hire 10 workers or more are known as formal sector establishments, and those people who work in these establishments are known as formal sector workers. Something that is very different about formal sector workers is that they are entitled to certain benefits which the workers in the informal sectors are not. What are these benefits in particular? Such as they are entitled to pension, gratuity, PF, which workers working in informal sector do not get. So let us now understand who are the workers in informal sector. Informal sector is all those enterprises which employ less than 10 hired workers. The workers working in these enterprises are known as informal sector workers. For example, construction workers, for example, casual labor, all these are informal sector workers. Why so? Because when they are working in these establishments, they are not entitled to benefits such as pension, gratuity, PF, etc., which are available to the workers in formal sector. Now, having understood what is a formal sector and informal sector and who are formal sector employees and informal sector workers, we can understand what is informalization of workforce. When workers move from formal sector, which gives them certain benefits such as gratuity, pension, as I mentioned, when they move from this sector to a rather insecure scenario of working which is there in the informal sector, where they are not entitled to any provident fund, gratuity or pension, this process is known as informalization of workforce. There are many reasons which contribute to the informalization of workforce in our country. Let us also discuss some facts about informalization of workforce. About only 6% of workers in India are working in the formal sector, that is, the rest 94% are working in the informal sector, which speaks volume about informalization of workforce in India. Out of 30 million formal sector workers, only 6 million, that is only about 21%, are women. From this point we understand that less females are there in the formal sector in secure jobs where they can get social security benefits, and in comparison more men are there in the formal sector, whereas in the informal sector there is more percentage of female workers. The next concept we need to discuss about the changing employment scenario is jobless growth. In the diagram here, we are going to see the concept of jobless growth. There are two curves. The lighter curve shows the increase in GDP and the darker curve shows increase in employment. We can see that in the beginning, that is in the 1950s, the GDP growth was more than the growth in employment. Slowly, the gap between GDP growth and employment reduced over a period of time, and in 1961 to 66 we see that the growth in employment and the growth in GDP, the gap is very less. If we recollect, this is the time when Green Revolution took place. Then after this period, again the gap between GDP and employment has increased over a period of time. Then in 1991, the gap between GDP growth rate and employment growth rate has reduced. We are seeing that after 1991, the gap between GDP growth rate and the growth of employment is widening. This indicates that GDP has grown at a faster rate than the rate of growth in employment. This concept is known as jobless growth. When GDP grows faster and the growth in GDP is not accompanied by the similar growth in employment, the concept is known as jobless growth. Let us study about it further. Thus, India experienced jobless growth, that is, Indian economy was not able to produce more goods and services without generating employment. This is the analysis of the diagram that we had done. There are fluctuations in the growth of GDP during this period. Employment grew at a rate of not more than 2%, but in the late 90s, employment growth started declining and there was a widening gap between the growth of GDP and employment. Thus, Indian economy experienced jobless growth, that is, it was not able to generate as much employment as it was generating the goods and services.